he wasn't broke. That's the thing nobody tells you. Was an engineer, 61 years old, good salary, solid 401k, no debt worth losing sleep over. By every number that matters, he was fine, more than fine. But every Monday morning, he was counting down, not to the weekend, to 62. Not because 62 meant anything special to him personally. He just assumed it did. Social Security starts around 62. Medicare kicks in at 65. So somewhere along the way, he absorbed the idea that those government checkpoints were the real finish line. The ones he had to cross before he was allowed to stop. I've watched this happen more times than I can count. Smart, capable people who have already won the financial game, but they're still sitting in traffic at 7 a.m., back aching, coffee going cold, because nobody told them they could leave earlier. The real loss isn't the money. Think about what your body can actually do at 55 versus 65. At 55, you strap on a hiking pack and go. At 65, you're negotiating with your lower back just to get through a long flight. That's not a scare tactic. That's just biology being honest with you. So here's what this video is actually about. It's not about whether you can afford to retire at 55. For a lot of you watching this, you probably already can. It's about the hidden technical traps that could cost you tens of thousands of dollars if you move wrong, and the one healthcare gap that keeps more Gen X professionals chained to their desks than any other single factor. Most advisors will tell you to work longer to be safe. What they rarely walk you through are the specific rules that can either unlock your exit or quietly destroy it. That changes today. Let me tell you what happened when I sat down with Wes and actually pulled up his numbers. He had been telling himself one more year for 6 years. 6 years. Every December, he'd run the math, convince himself he needed a little more cushion, and sign back up for another 12 months of early alarms and conference calls he stopped caring about sometime around 2021. When we finally laid everything out on the table, the picture was uncomfortable. Not because he was behind, because he wasn't. At 55, Wes had already crossed every threshold he needed. The 401k balance, the projected expenses, the conservative withdrawal rate. It was all there. He had been retirement ready for 6 years and had no idea. That's one more year syndrome. And it's not a discipline problem or a math problem. It's a framing problem. The default checkpoints that get drilled into us, 62 for Social Security, 65 for Medicare, become psychological anchors so heavy that even people with solid finances can't let go of them. They're not planning to retirement. They're counting toward a government-issued permission slip. What Wes didn't know, what most people in his position don't know, is that there's a legal mechanism that could have unlocked his 401k at 55 without triggering a single dollar in early withdrawal penalties. It's called the Rule of 55. The core of it is straightforward. If you leave your employer for any reason in the calendar year you turn 55 or older, the IRS allows you to take penalty-free withdrawals from that employer's 401k plan. Not from an IRA, not from an old jobs plan. Specifically from the 401k tied to the job you just left. Normally, tapping a 401k before age 59 and a half costs you. The IRS adds a 10% early withdrawal penalty on top of ordinary income tax. On a $50,000 withdrawal, that's $5,000 just gone. Not invested, not compounding. Gone, the Rule of 55 eliminates that penalty entirely. The 2026 contribution limits put this in sharper focus. The IRS cap is now $24,500. Plus an $8,000 catch-up for anyone 50 and older. If you've been maximizing contributions in your 50s, you could be sitting on a very significant balance that's now legally accessible years earlier than you thought. Here's the trade-off nobody spells out clearly. Every year you work past 55 when you didn't need to, you're not just trading time for money. You're trading your highest functioning years for a larger account balance you statistically may never fully spend. Fidelity's research consistently shows that many retirees die with more money than they retired with. because fear keeps them spending less than their portfolio could support. You work an extra 7 years, accumulate more, spend cautiously, and leave a larger inheritance. Meanwhile, the decade between 55 and 65, the go-go years as retirement planners call them, when your health is still cooperating and your energy is still real, those years don't roll over. They just close. Wiz understood this when we talked it through. He got quiet for a moment. Then he said something I haven't forgotten. I didn't think I was allowed. The rule of 55 is real, it's legal, and it applies to more people than realize it exists. But before you start mentally drafting your resignation email, there are landmines buried in this thing that most financial advisors, including well-meaning ones, never warn you about. And stepping on one of them doesn't just delay your retirement. It can permanently destroy the window. I have to be honest with you about something. Early in my career, I assumed every 401k plan worked the same way under the rule of 55. Same rules, same flexibility, just plug in the numbers and go. Then I actually read the summary plan description of a major healthcare corporation's retirement plan, and I found a clause that stopped me cold. Their plan didn't allow partial withdrawals. If you left that company and triggered the rule of 55, you had one option: take everything out at once. All of it. In a single calendar year. You can imagine what that does to your tax bracket. What should have been a smooth, controlled income stream becomes a one-time taxable event large enough to push a retiree into a much higher federal bracket and potentially phase out deductions they were counting on. I've seen people lose tens of thousands of dollars to a rule they thought was protecting them, simply because nobody told them to check the fine print first. That's rollover trap number 1. And it has 2 parts. First, the plan itself may not allow partial withdrawals. You have to request the summary plan description from HR, not a summary of the summary, the actual document, and look specifically for withdrawal flexibility language. This is not something to assume. Call HR directly and ask, does our plan allow partial distributions under the rule of 55, or is it lump sum only? Second, and this is the one that catches people who think they're being smart. If you roll your 401k into an IRA, before you're done using the rule of 55, you permanently lose access to it. The rule of 55 applies only to the 401k at the job you just left. The moment that money moves into an IRA, it becomes subject to the standard 59.5 rule again. No exceptions. I've watched people take a rollover recommendation from a well-intentioned advisor and unknowingly lock themselves out of 4 or 5 years of penalty-free access they had already earned. So if you're planning to use the rule of 55, you leave that money exactly where it is until you've made your last withdrawal under this provision. Then you reassess. Now, the rule covers the penalty. It doesn't cover the other reason most Gen X professionals say they can't leave before 65. Healthcare. This is the real wall. Not the 401k mechanics. Not the sequence of returns. Not even Social Security timing. When I ask people what's actually keeping them at their desks, the answer, more often than not, comes back to insurance. The fear of funding health coverage for themselves and a spouse for an entire decade before Medicare arrives is enough to override every other number in the plan. And in 2026, that fear just got a concrete reason to exist. The enhanced premium tax credits that had been propping up ACA marketplace plans since 2021 expired at the end of 2025. They were not renewed, which means the subsidy cliff is back and it is steep. Here's how the cliff works. ACA subsidies are calculated based on your MAGI, your modified adjusted gross income. For 2026, the cutoff sits at 400% of the federal poverty level. For a single person, that's roughly $51,040. For a married couple, it's around $68,960. If your income lands below that threshold, you receive subsidies on a sliding scale. Your premiums stay manageable, but if your income crosses that line by even $1, the subsidies don't phase out gradually. They vanish completely. You go from meaningful assistance to full unsubsidized market rate premiums overnight. For a couple in their late 50s or early 60s, that market rate number can exceed $20,000 a year. This is not a hypothetical. This is the structure of the law as it stands today. The path through it is MAGI management. The strategy isn't to earn less. It's to control which income sources count toward your MAGI calculation and which ones don't. Roth IRA withdrawals don't count. Returns on a taxable brokerage account only count to the extent of realized capital gains, not the principal. Health savings account distributions used for qualified medical expenses don't count. Strategic Roth conversions done in the years before you retire, when you're still earning and can absorb the tax, reduce the future taxable balance you'll need to draw from. The framework is essentially this. You build what I'd call an income funnel before you retire with different layers. A taxable layer from your 401k that you size carefully to stay under the subsidy threshold. A tax-free layer from Roth accounts or HSA funds to cover the rest of your spending without touching your MAGI. The two layers together give you the income you need without the cliff. This isn't exotic financial engineering. It's reading the tax code and using it the way it was written. The people who get hurt are the ones who treat all their retirement accounts as one undifferentiated pile of money and pull from whichever account is most convenient. That convenience, depending on the year, can cost more than most people spend on a car. There's a version of retirement planning where you understand these rules and build around them deliberately. Call it the resilience path. And there's a version where you don't, where you stay in the office until 62 because the healthcare question feels too complicated to solve. That's the fragility path. And the frustrating part is that the fragility path isn't safer. It's just more familiar. The numbers don't change based on how comfortable we are with them. That much I can promise you. I don't have a crystal ball about what politicians will do to healthcare law over the next decade. Anyone who tells you they do is selling something. But the math of today's tax structure doesn't lie. And right now, today, the structure creates a gap that can either cost you or work for you, depending entirely on one decision. Let me show you exactly what I mean. Two couples, same age, both 60. Both retired early. Both need $70,000 a year to live the way they want to live. Same starting line. Very different outcomes. Couple A doesn't have a strategy for which accounts they pull from. They just know they need $70,000, and their 401k is the biggest pot. So they take $70,000 straight from the 401k. Clean, simple, obvious. Here's what happens. The 2026 AC subsidy cliff for a married couple sits at $68,960. Couple A just landed at $70,000 in MAGI. They cleared the cliff by $1,040. $1,040 over the line. And because the cliff is a cliff and not a slope, they don't lose a portion of their subsidy. They lose all of it. Their health insurance premium jumps to full market rate. For a couple in their early 60s, that number can run north of $20,000 a year. Some markets higher. They didn't retire recklessly. They didn't overspend. They just didn't know where the line was drawn. Couple B does the same math differently. They also need $70,000. But they split the sources. They take $50,000 from the 401k, which counts toward MAGI. For the remaining $20,000, they pull from a Roth IRA, which doesn't count toward MAGI at all, or from the principal of a taxable brokerage account, where only realized capital gains count, not the full withdrawal. Either way, their MAGI lands around $50,000. Comfortably inside the threshold, they get the subsidies. Their monthly premium might run a few $100s. The full $70,000 goes toward actually living their retirement, not patching a gap that a little planning could have closed. The difference between those two couples isn't income. It isn't savings rate. It isn't even financial sophistication in any complicated sense. It's one decision. Where does this withdrawal come from? That one decision, made wrong, costs couple A somewhere in the range of $20,000 in a single year. Made right, couple B keeps that money working. Over a decade of early retirement, the gap compounds into something that can genuinely reshape what retirement looks like on the back end. This is why I keep coming back to the MAGI funnel as a framework. Not because it's clever, because it's the specific thing standing between a comfortable early retirement and one where you're constantly anxious about the next insurance renewal. If you want to go deeper on building that funnel, on the exact sequencing of which accounts to draw from and in what order, and on how to run Roth conversions in your 50s to reduce the taxable pressure later, that's the kind of step-by-step work we do regularly on this channel. Subscribe if you haven't already, because this is exactly the territory we cover without the jargon spiral. Now, you've seen the trap. You've seen what it costs when it catches you, and you've seen how couple B walked right around it. The next question is the practical one. What do you actually do first, starting this week? How do I actually walk out the door at 55 and not spend the next decade second-guessing myself? That's the question underneath all of this. Not the theory, not the framework, the actual sequence of moves in order that gets you from where you are now to a retirement that holds together under real-world pressure. There's a version of this I know from the inside. I've had nights where I was sitting at the kitchen table, papers spread out everywhere, running healthcare cost scenarios for my own family, trying to figure out if the numbers were real or if I was just telling myself what I wanted to hear. It's one thing to understand a strategy intellectually. It's another thing entirely to stake your financial security on it. That fear is legitimate. But I can tell you from experience, when the numbers are actually on paper in front of you, the fog lifts. The decision stops feeling like a leap and starts feeling like a calculation. So here are the 3 steps, in order. Step 1, verify the rule of 55 at your specific company, not at a company like yours. Call HR and ask for the summary plan description, the full document, not a benefits summary sheet. When you have it, look for 2 things. First, does the plan allow partial withdrawals, or does it require a lump sum distribution? Second, are there any plan-specific restrictions on the timing or frequency of distributions after separation? If the plan only allows lump sum withdrawals, you need to know that now, not the week you hand in your notice. Because a forced lump sum in your first year of retirement could push your taxable income high enough to blow your AC, a subsidy threshold, spike your Medicare surcharges down the road, and create a tax bill that takes years to absorb. This one phone call is worth more than most paid consultations. And one more thing on this step. Do not roll your 401k into an IRA until you are completely finished drawing from it under the rule of 55. Once that money moves, the provision is gone. Step 2. Start building your MAGI funnel now, while your income is still high. The years between 50 and 54 are actually your best window for this. You're likely near peak earnings, which means you can max out contributions aggressively. The 2026 401k limit is $32,500 for anyone 50 and older, including the catch-up. If your employer offers a Roth 401k option, consider splitting contributions between traditional and Roth. You're paying the tax now at a rate you can plan around, rather than later when your income sources and tax situation are harder to control. Outside of the 401k, a taxable brokerage account gives you flexibility that tax-advantaged accounts can't. Withdrawals from principal don't count toward MAGI. Only realized gains do, which means a well-managed taxable account can be your most useful tool for filling the gap between what your 401k covers and what the subsidy threshold allows. The goal is to arrive at retirement with 3 distinct pools: A traditional 401k you can draw from in controlled amounts. A Roth account that gives you tax-free income when you need to stay under the MAGI line, and a taxable account for flexibility in between. That structure is what makes the funnel work. Step 3. Run an honest expense purge before you finalize any retirement number. Most people calculate retirement income needs based on their current spending. But current spending includes a significant category that disappears the day you stop working. Commuting costs, parking, work clothes, dry cleaning, weekday lunches, and the FACA taxes that come out of every paycheck. Social Security and Medicare withholding, none of that follows you into retirement. Add those up for your situation. Conservatively, that number runs somewhere between $1,500 and $3,000 a month for most working professionals. That's $18,000 to $36,000 a year that your retirement portfolio doesn't need to replace because the expense doesn't exist anymore. This matters because a lot of people look at their current salary and assume they need to replace most of it. In practice, they need to replace their actual lifestyle spending, which is a meaningfully smaller number once you strip out the cost of going to work. Running this calculation honestly often reveals that the gap between where you are and where you need to be is smaller than the anxiety around it suggests. Do these 3 things before you make any final decision. Verify the plan mechanics, build the income layers, and strip out the phantom expenses. Not as a checklist exercise, as a way of turning a fear-based question into a math problem. And math problems have answers. Here's what I want to leave you with. Retiring at 55 is not a gamble. It's not reckless, and it's not something reserved for people who got lucky with a startup or inherited the right last name. For a lot of people watching this, it's a legitimate option that's been sitting on the table unused, mostly because nobody laid out the mechanics clearly enough to make it feel real. The rule of 55 is a real provision in the tax code. MAGI management is a real strategy with real numbers behind it. The 3 steps we walked through are not theoretical. They are the actual sequence that moves you from, I think I might be able to retire early, to I know exactly what I need to do and in what order. What tends to keep people stuck isn't the money. I've seen this enough times to say it with confidence. It's the absence of a clear picture. When the picture is blurry, staying put feels safer than moving. But staying put has a cost too, one that doesn't show up on any account statement. Time is the one asset that doesn't compound. You can't dollar cost average your way back into your 50s. The years between 55 and 65, when your body is still cooperating, when you can travel without it being an ordeal, when you have the energy to actually show up for the life you've been building toward, those years are finite in a way that your portfolio, managed well, is not. I'm not telling you to retire tomorrow. I'm telling you to find out if you could. Because there's a meaningful difference between choosing to work and feeling like you have no other option. If today's video helped clarify any piece of that picture for you, I'd genuinely like to know where you still feel stuck. Drop it in the comments below. Is it the healthcare gap that still feels unsolvable? Is it uncertainty about how your specific 401k plan works? Whatever the wall is, name it. This channel exists to work through exactly these questions, practically, without judgment, for people who are in or approaching their 50s and deserve straight answers. Subscribe if you haven't already. We cover this territory regularly, and the next video goes deeper into Roth conversion strategy for early retirees, specifically how to sequence conversions in your final working years to reduce the tax pressure later. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourself.